If you want to go ahead and open to Numbers chapter 13, is where we'll begin this morning. Numbers 13. I'm going to be looking at 3 examples of doing the right thing. 2 of them are very familiar to us. The third one you may not be aware of so much. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But here in Numbers 13, the people of God, the Israelites, have come out of Egypt and they're making preparations to go into the promised land. And we're very familiar with this story that Moses selected 12 spies to go into the land. And they spent 40 days there, and they finally come back to give their report. And if you look at drop down to verse 30 of chapter 13, they come back, there's a little bit of an explanation given about the land. They do say it's flowing with milk and honey, but nevertheless, the people, they live in fortified cities, in these large cities, and they're giants that are in the land. It just doesn't look good for us. But then in verse 30 it says, "Then Caleb, who was one of the spies, quieted the people before Moses and said, 'We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it.' But the men who had gone up with him, the other spies, 'We're not able to go up against this people. They're too strong for us.' So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, 'The land through which we have gone, and spying it out, is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are of great size.'" And so here you've got, and of course we're familiar that Joshua is the other spy that gives the good report. So we've got 10-2. The 10 spread their information, and all the congregation, all the people of Israel are now, why are we out here? Why did we go through all of this? In chapter 14, it says, why didn't we just die in the land of Egypt? Why did we have to come out here in the wilderness to die? They wanted to appoint a new leader and return to Egypt. They hadn't seen anything yet, hadn't done anything yet. They just heard this report of these 10 spies. We can't do it. And all the rest of the people are saying, okay, let's give up and turn around and go back. Drop down in chapter 14, go down to verse 7. Joshua and Nun are speaking to all of the people and saying, "They spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, 'The land which we passed through to spy out is exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he'll bring us into this land.'" This is the key to what, not only just the viewpoint, but where Joshua and Caleb are coming from. They saw the same thing the other 10 spies saw, but they put their trust in God to carry through what he had promised. "I'm going to give you this land." Yes, they're going to have to go in with an army and fight the people or take the land physically, but it's already been determined they're going to get it because God said, "I'm going to give you this land." So that's the viewpoint they're coming from. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. We're going to have to fight and battle, but we are going to be victorious. Verse 9, "Only do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of the land. The people were saying, we want to go back to Egypt. They started talking about getting a new leader. But as they're saying here, the people weren't rebelling against Moses. In fact, in that sense they were, but ultimately they're rebelling against God. Do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. So here's the reaction of the congregation, verse 10. But the congregation said to stone them with stones. And then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. Joshua and Caleb, two individuals standing up against the whole rest of the nation of Israel at that time, the people of God. Moses and Aaron would be, of course, on his side, but in this report and talking to the people, giving them this information, all the contradictory things that the other 10 spies were saying, these two stood up against it all. If you found yourself in a similar kind of situation, you and one other person, everybody else is saying this, but you're in the right, would you stand up to it? If in the congregation here, say 300-400 people at any one given time, if you were the only two, could you stand up against it? If it was 100,000, could you stand up against them? If it was 1 million, they're talking about the whole nation that's come out of Egypt that these two are standing up against. So it goes on, and now that the Lord has made his presence known, he wants to, for their unbelief, for their grumbling, he's going to destroy them. And Moses intercedes again for God's people. The Lord is angry with them. Drop down to verse 19. This is Moses speaking. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your loving kindness, just as you also have forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. And so the Lord said, I have pardoned them according to your word. Moses interceded again for God's people. He was, here he had done all these great works, brought them out of Egypt. They witnessed them, the 10 plagues, everything, the dividing of the sea, and they wanted to go back just because of this bad report. But Moses intercedes, and because Moses intercedes, God pardons them. But then notice what he says in verse 21. But indeed, as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord. Surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times, have not listened to my voice. And the commentaries say these 10 times, it may not be referring to 10 specific times, but it's probably used as a figure of speech, because there were more than 10 times, just depending on just what he was exactly talking about. But it could be just a figure of speech. That all the times that they put God to the test, not listen to his voice. Verse 23, they shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurn me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. So because Caleb, and then eventually Joshua is brought up as well, he's mentioned down in verse 30 that surely you shall not come into the land I swore to say to you, except Caleb and Joshua. But as he says here, my servant Caleb, he has a different spirit. He followed me fully. It goes back to what they were said in verse 8. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he'll bring us into this land and give it to us. They put their trust in the Lord. Yes, the people lived in fortified cities and were strong and of great size. But God has already told us he's going to give it to us. And so Joshua and Caleb stood up against the whole nation there. Drop down to verse 35 here in chapter 14. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely I will do all this. Surely this I will do to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be destroyed, and they will die. As for the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, and who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing a bad report concerning the land, even those men who brought out a very bad report of the land died by a plague before the Lord. Those 10 spies God dealt with immediately. They died by a plague. The rest of the nation of Israel wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for every day that the spies spent in the land. Joshua and Caleb would be the only two out of this group at that time that would enter the promised land to receive an inheritance. Everyone else at that time of a certain age would die in the wilderness. Turn over to Joshua chapter 14. Moses has died. Joshua is now leading the people. Joshua 14, beginning in verse 7. This is where it talks about the inheritance that Caleb would receive. This is Caleb speaking. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought word back to him that it was as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt with fear, but I followed the Lord my God fully. So Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land on which your foot is trodden will be an inheritance to you, to your children forever, because you have followed the Lord fully. Now behold, the Lord has let me live just as he spoke. These 45 years from the time the Lord spoke this word to Moses, when Israel walked in the wilderness, and now behold, I'm 85 years old today. I'm still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now, and for war and for going out and coming in. Caleb was 40 years old at the time he was originally sent in to spy out the land. He and Joshua stood up against all the other spies and against what the people wanted. And now he's going to receive his inheritance. It took 45 years, the 40 years of the wilderness wandering, and another 5 years as they entered in the promised land. But now, as an 85-year-old, but still has the strength of a 40-year-old, he's received his inheritance. And Joshua, of course, received his as well. As he said in look down at verse 14. It talks about, therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, and then the last part of verse 14, because he followed the Lord God of Israel fully. He received his inheritance. What's the inheritance we're looking forward to? Our rest in heaven. If we follow God fully, our rest is already guaranteed. God told them, I'm going to give you this land. It's yours. You're going to have to do certain things to take it, but the battle's already, we're victorious. In the same way, in heaven, it's already ours. Turn over to Deuteronomy, or turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 34, the last chapter of Deuteronomy. In verse 9. Now Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him, and the sons of Israel listened to him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. So at some point prior to Moses' death, he puts his hands on Joshua. He's filled with the spirit of wisdom, and Joshua then does succeed Moses as leader. Now at the time Joshua assumes leadership, they're just getting ready to come, they're back again, getting ready now to go into the promised land. They've been wandering around the wilderness for 40 years. And Joshua now sends 2 spies secretly to go into the land. And some in the commentators have made the point, obviously he's thinking about what happened the first time they tried this. And now, probably just to keep things kind of under wraps, he now sends 2 spies, not 10, and he does it secretly. Their conjecture was that he didn't want a repeat of what happened the first time. But this is the same thing that's now happening again. They're spying out the land. And then he tells them to especially look at the city of Jericho. We're not told why that specifically, but that'll play out as well as we go through this. The king knows about them, the king of Jericho. Jericho is estimated to be a city of about 2,000 to 3,000 at that time. It's just a little city-state. Now, they had to be aware, you think about people, they've been wandering around the wilderness for 40 years, now they're making their way to the promised land. It's estimated there were at least 1 million people, there could have been more. I've used this illustration before. If everybody in St. Louis, all the population of St. Louis traveled west to Jefferson City, got everybody in Jefferson City, continued on their journey to Kansas City, got everybody, all the population of Kansas City, came south, all those people, everybody in Springfield joined with them and got down to James River. Do you think the people on the other side of James River might not begin to just wonder what in the world is going on? I think that's what's going on here. These people on the other side of the Jordan, they knew what was out there, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. So these two spies come in, and the king wants to know, about them. Just flip back over, keep your place here, and flip back over to Exodus chapter 15. This is it's the Song of Moses. It's just after they've been delivered through the Red Sea. And beginning in verse 14, Exodus 15, verse 14. The peoples, talking about those peoples of the land, have heard, they tremble. Anguish has gripped the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed. The leaders of Moab, trembling grips them, and all the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Terror and dread fall upon them, and by your greatness of your arm, they are motionless as stone. That was the response of the people that heard about and knew about what God had done for his people to get them out of Egypt, and dividing of the sea. And so now here are the people ready to come into the promised land. How are the people going to react? In going back then to Joshua, the two spies go in, they go to Jericho, and they try and hide out at the home of Rahab and the harlot. And there's speculation as to exactly why they may have chose her to go there, but there is going to be a reason. Was it specified that that the two spies would especially pay attention to Jericho? And once they got to Jericho, they ended up at Rahab's house. Now they did get there secretly, because the king sent somebody there. We want to know about these two men that came. They knew all these people were out there, and a little area of 2,000, 3,000 people, they probably had their own spies, keeping an eye out. Is anybody spying us out? They were aware of it. So notice here, go to Joshua 2, beginning in verse 8. It's been 40 years since the incident of the dividing of the Red Sea, the miracles that God wrought there. And she had hidden them in the upper level of her home. He said, now before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. Just what Moses said in Exodus. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who are beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted away, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Just think about what she's saying here. It's 40 years later, and that's what took place is still as fresh in their mind as it was the day it happened. Notice what she says in verse 10. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea. They hadn't witnessed it, they hadn't seen it, but they had heard it. What about the faith of those Israelites, all those people who witnessed the mighty works of God, saw every day what he was doing, they were the ones that went through the Red Sea when God divided it, and they hear a little bit of it, and they hear this bad report from the spies, and why are we going to die out here? They weren't putting their trust, their faith in God. But here was a woman who, having not seen, only heard, she had more faith than they did. And she makes them promise that they will deliver her family. We're familiar with the story. To deliver them, and of course they did. So let's go over to the New Testament and look at some things that are recorded about Rahab. First of all, in Matthew chapter 1, in the genealogy of Jesus, won't just make mention about it here. We're told that Simon, a man by the name of Salmon, not Simon, but Solomon, marries Rahab, the same Rahab we're talking about here. They have a son, Boaz. Boaz marries Ruth. They have a son, Obed. Obed is the father of Jesse, the father of David, and on to the coming of Christ. Rahab, the harlot, is an ancestor of Jesus. Then go over to Hebrews chapter 11, the chapter on faith we're all very familiar with. Hebrews 11, go to verse 31. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. Her faith saved her. The faith she had in the Lord she didn't know, and the Lord that had done these great signs and miracles that she had not witnessed, but she put her faith in the Lord God to save her family. And then turn over to James chapter 2. James 2, beginning in verse 21. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up Isaac his son on the altar? You see that faith was working with his works, and as a result of the works, faith was perfected. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, And Abraham believed God, and was reckoned to him as righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. You see that a man is justified by works, and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? Rahab had faith in God, and she was justified in the exact same way that Abraham was. Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Rahab had faith in God and was justified by the works. What was the works she did? She received the messengers and sent them out another way. She protected the two spies, and she ultimately, her and her family were saved. And she continued on with the Israelites, and ultimately, as we just pointed out, was in the lineage of Jesus. We follow in the footsteps of Abraham and of Rahab the harlot, a woman of ill repute who had faith in God, and because of her faith in God, was declared righteous because of her works. We follow in that same manner. Okay, the last example, and we won't have time to finish it today. Turn back to Numbers 25. I'm going to go back into Numbers. Okay, going back to the time of Moses and Aaron. Aaron had 4 sons. The 2 older sons we're familiar with, Nadab and Abihu. They offered strange fire to God, fire that he hadn't commanded, and God struck them down. That left the 2 younger sons, Eleazar and Ithamar. They were serving as priests along with their father Aaron. In Numbers 20, Aaron dies. Eleazar is chosen as his successor by God. Eleazar then has his son Phinehas. And in Numbers 25, the people have sinned. It says in verse 1, Israel remained at Shittim, and the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. And they were sacrificing to their gods, and they were bowing down to their gods. And the Lord was angry with them, and he told Moses to execute all the leaders of the people, as he says in verse 4, that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. And so Moses, preparations to do that, and an Israelite, verse 6, man comes and takes a Midianite woman in front of the whole congregation. And Phinehas, verse 7, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, and he rose in the midst of the congregation and took a spear in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and pierced both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through the body. So the plague on the sons of Israel was checked, but 24,000 died as a result of their sins. But it took this action of Phinehas to stop that plague. Drop down to verse 10. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, has turned away my wrath from the sons of Israel, in that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not destroy the sons of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore say, behold, I give him my covenant of peace, and it shall be for him and his descendants after him a covenant of perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the sons of Israel. So we're going to be looking at a line of these descendants. Aaron, chosen as first high priest, and now Eleazar, his son, would succeed him. And now Phinehas, Eleazar's son, because of his actions, God has now told him that your line will continue. It shall be for him and his descendants after him a covenant of perpetual priesthood. This line would follow all through the priesthood in the history of Israel until the time of Eli, and we'll get to here in just a minute. Just flip over real quick to Psalm 106. Beginning in verse 28. In this psalm, he's talking about this specific incident that happened in Numbers 25. They joined themselves also to Baal Peor, and ate sacrifices offered to the dead, and they provoked him, speaking of God, to anger with their deeds, and the plague broke out among them. Then Phinehas stood up and interposed, and so the people were stayed, the plague was stayed, and it was reckoned to him for righteousness to all generations forever. The actions that Phinehas took on behalf of the Lord were reckoned as righteousness. Just like Rahab, just like Abraham, doing the right thing for the Lord. As I said, the line then followed of the priest. Because Phinehas did the right thing, God was going to bless his lineage, his descendants. But for some reason, and the Bible doesn't explain why, the priesthood kind of shifts over to Eli. We're familiar with Eli. Eli was a descendant of Ithamar. You've got Aaron, his two remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar. Eleazar has his son Phinehas. Ithamar continues as a priest as well, and one of his descendants is Eli. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 2. First Samuel 2, verse 27. We're familiar with the story of Eli, his two sons, how they acted and did abominable things. They took the women that served in the temple, they were sleeping with them, they were eating food they weren't supposed to eat in a way that wasn't prescribed by God. In verse 27 it says, then a man of God, we're not told what his name was, it might have been Nathan because he was there in this general time period, came to Eli and said to him, thus says the Lord, did I not indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in bondage to Pharaoh's house? He's looking all the way back to Aaron. Because Eli he followed through the line of Ithamar, goes all the way back to Aaron. Verse 28, did I not choose them from all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to carry an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the fire offerings of the sons of Israel? Why do you kick at my sacrifice and at my offering which I commanded in my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by making yourselves fat with the choicest of every offering of my people Israel? Therefore the Lord God of Israel declares, I did indeed say that your house and the house of your father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me will be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming when I will break your strength and the strength of your father's house, so there will not be an old man in your house. You will see the distress of my dwelling in spite of all the good that I do on Israel, and an old man will not be in your house forever. Yet I will not cut off every man of yours from my altar, so that your eyes will fail from weeping, and your soul grieve, and all the increase of your house will die in the prime of life. This is the sign to you which will come concerning your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. On the same day both of them will die. But I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and in my soul, and I will build him an enduring house, and he will walk before me, my anointed, always. This individual is Zadok, and we'll pick up with him next week in this line of looking at the blessings of those who are serving God, doing the right thing. Phinehas would be blessed, his descendants would be blessed because of his actions, and now God is going to take this position that Eli and his descendants have, and he's going to go back now to the descendants of Eleazar and to this individual Zadok. And we'll look at him again next week by his doing the right thing and the promise and the blessings that came to his descendants for doing the right thing. So we'll pick up with Zadok next week then. Thank you.